Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach, and today we're going to take a look at the North Melbourne Footy Club and everything they've got to offer our SuperCoach sides in 2017. If you haven't caught these previews so far, we take a bit of a broad look at potential breakout candidates, players returning from injury, and just generally guys that should be on your radar at this time of year. And to be honest, North Melbourne aren't bringing a great deal to the table. Many predict they will fall next year, and I tend to agree. I think after they've lost somewhere in the vicinity of 1,100 games of experience, they'll definitely be playing quite a lot of young guys, and I think they'll certainly drop down the ladder, perhaps significantly. So in turn from that, they're not really bringing a great deal to the table for SuperCoach. There are a couple of guys that we'll take a look at, and a few guys that I think will improve, but not necessarily SuperCoach relevant. They're somewhat of a plain team, North Melbourne. I don't mean to rag on them too much if you're a Roos fan, but they do tend to have a midfield that's forever been quite consistent and even without any superstars. Their forward line's rather tall, and they sort of lack a rebounding defender, so they don't give us a great deal of options for SuperCoach, unfortunately. But one man who is certainly very relevant, and that's Todd Goldstein. Of course, he dropped off ever so slightly last year. He got fairly sore by all reports. There were thoughts that he would definitely be rested at certain stages late in the year. It didn't really prove the case. He still played quite a few games. He did average 108 points, which is pretty impressive, no doubt, but that is a fair drop on what he averaged in 2015, which was, of course, 128.8, which will surely go down as his career best season, no doubt, but he's certainly shown that he can average big numbers in previous seasons as well. Of course, 2011 he burst on the scene, 113.2, then from there on out 93, 113.5, 106.9, and then the two seasons I just mentioned before. So I think he did drop off a fair bit, especially in the second half of the year. There was that train of thought that he definitely got sore, and it really did start to affect his scores. He was definitely consistent without having very big scores. Now in the last 10 rounds he averaged 99.1, which probably backs up that thought. Did have some big scores in the early parts of the year, a couple of sort of 160 plus games, but definitely dropped away a little bit, and I think he's at a very great price for us this year. I think at, what is he, 588,000. Of course, Gawn is extremely expensive, where I think Goldstein offers just as much potential and at a pretty nice price, really. I mean, you're paying a fair bit at Dosh, but he's a proven performer. He's probably capable of averaging 110 plus, as we know, and we can get him at a slightly cheaper price than that. So I think Goldstein will be in quite a lot of sides. Gawn provokes a bit of debate, as does Grundy. They've probably been the three most discussed ruckmen, but I think Goldstein probably sits nicely in the middle. We know what we're going to get, and he's priced quite reasonably, so I think he'll be very popular, no doubt. Shaun Higgins is another guy I'll throw out there, priced at 426,000. Now, of course, he's a forward. He's about to turn 29. He's the sort of guy that his careers just seem to go on along at a somewhat quick rate. I mean, we sort of are hanging out for the year that Shaun Higgins really bursts onto the scene and tears it apart, but all of a sudden he's nearly 30. He still seems like quite a young, potentially great player, but he's just been riddled with injury, had the odd good year or two, but never really fulfilled his potential. And I suppose, will he get that opportunity next year with perhaps a chance to roll through the midfield, or even play a greater role if he can get a proper pre-season in? Because of course what's really held him back has been his body. Now, of course, in 2015 he averaged 95.3, which is career high, and that is pretty much surrounded by mediocre numbers. To get anything near it, we've got to go back to 2009, where he did sort of first establish himself, and he averaged 89 on that occasion. So I suppose historically we'd have to be crazy to select Shaun. I mean, he's proven to be injury prone, and has also pretty much shown that he isn't a consistent scorer. Now, why do I bring him to the table? I think he's got potential to really excel with those lack of players and guys who left North Melbourne, maybe a better role or more important role. And I think we saw when he got his body right at North Melbourne, where he did play, I think it was 21 games in 2015, that he did play a very good role. Hit the scoreboard, they like to use him. The Roos certainly need a bit of class through that midfield. Now, of course, Del Santo's gone, Wells has gone. Is Higgins going to be that guy, or at least try to play a bit of a Brett Deledio style role, sometimes off the half-back line, sometimes bursting off the half-forward line? Now, his body has been inconsistent as his scores have. 2014 and 15, he played 20 games and 21 games, which shows if he can get it right, he can play consistent games, but I don't think we've seen it enough over his career. Of course, last year he really struggled to get out in the park with, I think it was a knee injury from memory. So for 26,000, you'd have to be pretty brave, and you'd need to see a very strong summer from him, because I think if we see a strong summer, he could average upward of 90, but there are quite a few good options around his price, the likes of Wingard and Heaney. So he's someone a little bit different, but the combination of injury and inconsistent scores could be a recipe for disaster, and Higgins has certainly proven the sort of guy that's probably blacklisted for a lot of SuperCoach players, so be mindful of that. To be honest, that's probably all I've got for North Melbourne on a serious note. I think there are a lot of guys, like I said off the top, that will get better opportunity and greater opportunities in more pivotal positions, and they do have some likeable young guys, but most of them lurk around a mid-price sort of option, or they don't really have a dual position status, which makes them quite difficult to pick. I'll read through a few of these guys. Now, they're not necessarily players I would say pick, but they're probably worth discussing, and they're all players that I think could up their average by 15 to 20 points, but whether that's going to be possible or even bring him into contention is another story. Mason Wood, off the top, I don't think he could improve his average by that much. He averaged 82 last year, but I could certainly see him pushing around the 90. He's probably the most promising young gun at North Melbourne. A likely type, sort of your third tall forward, I suppose, at 192 centimetres, and he's very mobile. Broke out against the Hawks, where he scored 123, 20 touches, and he kicked 2 goals, 3, and certainly proved like very much a handful for the Hawthorn defence. Now, he averaged the 82 last year, 23 years old, coming into his real prime. Now, unfortunately, he had a very good stretch of 4 games, mind you. It is a small sample size, but from rounds 11 to 14, he averaged 94, high score of 123, low score of 79, and I think that's, while you're not going to pick him off the back of that, it provides a little glimpse to what he's capable of, and I think after he's struck down with knee injury, I think we could see, providing a good pre-season, that he could probably push his average towards the mid-90s potentially. I would say probably more high 80s, but he's certainly got potential. But being priced at 446k, and a guy who's going to play in a weak side and isn't proven, again, he's probably not SuperCoach relevant. Luke McDonald and Marley Williams, 2 potential guys to fill that role off a half-back flank that I mentioned off the top, is really lacking. McDonald simply stalled since his opening year, and he had the second year blues, followed up by the third year blues. Now he's really going to have to try and find his form. Only averaged the 64 points last year. He's priced at 348k. He's been highly touted as one of those impressive players, very much from his younger years, ever since that debut season. I think we've all felt a bit like Sean Atley, that he's probably going to come along and be damaging. We haven't seen it yet. Copped a very bad hamstring injury last year. Could a good summer help him catapult himself to relevance? I'm not too sure. I could probably see him averaging around 80, but again, it's not going to be enough to pick him. And Marley Williams, similar. Of course, he's priced at 309,000. Now, he showed that he can score points. Of course, in 2015, he averaged 85.7, and at that stage, I thought he was going to be a pretty relevant player. And then, of course, found himself at a new club this year after what was an inconsistent season, and he had a foot injury last year which really struggled, and hindered him to find his best form, which resulted him in the 56.8 average from, whatever the amount of games were. They were sort of patchy throughout the year, didn't really get together a string of games. So I think Williams is the sort of guy that could definitely feature heavily in the half-back line and using the ball out for North Melbourne. Could definitely be a guy who could find himself working himself towards that 85 average that he's shown he can do. But again, he's not really a guy I think we should be picking. Nathan Rovat, I'm a big fan of this fella. I reckon he could be a very good player for the North Melbourne Footy Club down the track. Of course, he was dropped from the Doggies side, the eventual premiers, in round 23, or in the conclusion for the first week of finals. So he was there and abouts for what turned out to be the premiership side. Only played the 4 games, averaged 69.2. Looks very good in the VFL. I think he's sort of that sort of player who is too good for VFL just about, but not quite cementing himself at AFL level. And again, awkward price, $301,000. He is a mid-forward. I think he could be maybe a sneaky option for your draft if you really wanted to use him in a late pick, if you got a big draft crop going. But other than that, I couldn't see him being relevant for our actual SuperCoach sides. And a lot of people scroll through Paul Ahern as well and think of him and the Giants, former top pick and now at a new club. Well, of course, he's not really going to feature next year with a knee injury. I think he'll be struggling to get any games in from memory. I think he had a pretty late knee injury and would certainly be a good pickup down the track for North Melbourne and will be at a nice price for us at some stage. But I just wouldn't be picking him this year because he won't feature in the early parts of 2017. Now, one last guy that we'll end on, and I think he's also a pretty talented roux and one that they'll be looking to really excel in that midfield opportunity that will now be possessed to him, and that's Trent Dumont. I think he showed glimpses of what he's capable of, had some good scores like Mason Wood, had a very good game against Hawthorn where he scored 121, 24 touches, 7 tackles. I haven't seen him play a great deal. Now he averaged 76.3 in his 3rd year, showed that he could produce some good scores, a few in the 80s, that ton there. He's priced at $415,000 as a midfielder. I couldn't see anyone picking him, but as I say, I think he is probably capable of upping that average and he could surprise you. I think he's a pretty good player. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes high 80s and even knocks on the door of 90, but I just thought it'd be worth discussing a few North Melbourne options that could really elevate their games next year. Of course, bear in mind the only 2 that I really think should be considered for our SuperCoach Classic sides are Goldstein and Higgins. Otherwise, I think you should be certainly just maybe looking at those other guys as draft options. But I thought since North Melbourne, you don't just want to do a podcast on 2 players. I thought I'd discuss a few guys that just might get you thinking, keep your eye on throughout the pre-season. You just never know. They might not be super relevant now. You just don't know. It might even help you upstage your mate when you get a golden choice for your draft team in the final round or something like that. So it could help you to pick up a bit of a hidden gem there. So hopefully that's helped you. Obviously North Melbourne aren't offering a great deal to our sides, as I mentioned a couple of times. Things could change for the pre-season. You never quite know who can bob up and hit some form, or it could be they could offer a few young draftee options around the 120,000 mark that of course I don't tend to preview at this point in time, but when we do our rookie priced and draftee players, of course I will. But nonetheless, if you think I've missed anyone, certainly let me know. Let me know your thoughts on North Melbourne and what you think they're going to bring to the table for us. I certainly don't think much. Maybe you disagree, let me know. But if you enjoy the video, give it a like, subscribe as always, and it's always good to get a few comments through as well and a bit of discussion. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you soon.